He explained that he'd been up on spacecraft, he'd woken up with marks on his body, shaved areas, his partner was having experiences, the children were having experiences. This 17-year-old has drawn over 250 beings that she interacts with, 250 of them. I have an 8-year-old that tells me that she's a hybrid. She's part human, part water being, and she comes from a water planet where she says, when I look in the mirror, I see my water being self. Another 7-year-old says that she's part blue avian, part human. Her avian family is her family. She goes back there regularly. Another 10-year-old explaining that he had chosen his mother on this planet. He'd chosen to incarnate to her.
Wow.
He comes from a planet where he's blue. He's come to connect with the center of this planet because he's going to help with all the pollution on this planet. The experiences of so many are absolutely extraordinary.
Welcome to Far Out with Faust, everybody. I am Faust Chicho, and today I am honored and excited and very delighted to be joined by none other than Mary Rodwell. Let me tell you about this incredible human being and what she has been up to for the last 30 years. I'll sum it up if I can. She is recognized internationally as one of Australia's leading researchers and writers in the UFO and contact phenomenon areas. She's the author of the highly acclaimed book, Awakening: How Extraterrestrial Contact Can Transform Your Life, and producer of the EBE award-winning documentaries, Expressions of ET Contact, A Visual Blueprint, and Expressions of ET Contact, A Communication and Healing Blueprint. Her most recent book is called The New Human, and that was released in 2016. She's also the founder and principal of Australian Close Encounter Resource Network, also known in UFO community as ACERN, or ACERN, for those of you who are into the acronym, which this was established in 1997 to provide professional counseling, support, hypnotherapy, and information to individuals and their families with these paranormal experiences and contact abduction phenomenon. Mary's also the director and chair of the experiencer support programs of Dr. Edgar Mitchell, and that's Foundations for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters. Also, the acronym for that is FREE. And an advisory committee member of Exopolitics. She's also organized the inaugural Hidden Truths International Conference held in Perth, Western Australia in 2003. She's researched like over 3,000 cases. She has, I could spend the next hour, speaking about her credentials and her accolades, but I'm gonna skip the rest of it because I think you get the idea. And without further ado, Mary, thank you so much for beaming in. It's an honor to have you.
It's an absolute pleasure, and thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. So I want people to understand a little bit about your work ethic and the way that you do things and the way you've gone about documenting and doing your work on these cases. For those of you who aren't familiar with Mary's work, she is all about cross-referencing, validating, coordinating, and collaboration. She doesn't look at any single source, but she takes in as much information as possible. So I just wanted to put that out there in case we have any skeptics, listening early on. I just want them to understand, where you're coming from and your incredible work ethic.
Well, all I'd like to say to the skeptics is that all that they believe, unless they actually look into this, they can't really judge it, because this is something that's so complex and so multi-layered. And the information, unfortunately, is very compromised in mainstream because we have a truth embargo. As anyone with half their brain attached will work that one out pretty fast. So the truth isn't out there in mainstream, but the truth is really with the individuals that I have come across the globe, and I'm 3,500 plus families, children, that are all saying very, very similar things, and the way that they've had their contact experiences. And to me, the experience, when it changes your life, is real.
Absolutely. And I was talking to Linda Moulton Howe one day, not on my podcast, unfortunately, but I've talked with her on several occasions at events, and she always says we live in a classified reality. And I think that's so well put. The truth is not out there. It's been hidden in many ways. So I agree with you. You know, so you were trained as a nurse, not to navigate alien or ET contact, but you know, it's just extraordinary. Did you? Was there a single case that kind of changed your understanding of everything? Like, how did you go from being a nurse to the field that you're in?
Well, it was a process. I think the process, in terms of my own personal journey, has always been, if it's been weird and wonderful, I've been interested in it because I've always wanted to know why we're here, what's it all about. I've always been seeking to understand the bigger picture, from a very kind of religious background initially to, realizing that things weren't as they always seemed, even within a religion. They don't answer all the questions and whatever, and you're constantly getting things that don't match or whatever. But nursing was my primary profession. I went from nursing into midwifery, and then
Mm.
I got married and had 3 kids. So
Mhm.
that stopped my working life for a while. And I was introduced to counseling in a medical practice and trained as a counselor when it was still very early in understanding that emotional psychological pain can manifest into illness. And I realized that, and I was really quite fascinated. Well, surely prevention is better than cure in my book. And so what was interesting about that was people were coming with all sorts of experiences to their medical practice, and some of them had what we would call supernatural experiences or
Mm.
out of the norm, where I always remember a gentleman saying to me, my dad comes to me, although he's passed on, and he'd give me information, he'd tell me things and whatever. And I didn't have a problem with that because it was useful to him. It comforted him and whatever.
Yeah.
And I always believed that there was life after death, that wasn't a problem for me. So that led me into counselling. And when I call it my midlife crisis, where I wanted to leave Britain and move to Australia because it was a warmer climate
Mm.
primarily. And I decided that, if we're going to live on this planet, let's go where it's nice and warm. That sort of appealed to me.
Oh
I,
yes.
I managed to persuade my husband and with my kids. Arriving in Australia, I had a choice to go back into nursing or to actually continue with the counseling side, which had really grabbed me in terms of the whole philosophy of it as helping
Hmm.
people through emotional trauma. So I worked in grief and bereavement and hospice. And
Wow.
when people are facing their mortality, it's amazing how that really concentrates you into what's really important. And again, there were those that had really strange experiences, unusual experiences, which again intrigued me. What is this about life after death? What is actually going on there? And to cut a long story short, I got interested in past lives, learned hypnosis, and started to work on a deeper level with individuals. And then, of course, extraordinary things came through with that. And apart from that, I was also exploring my own journey, which was to learn how to work more multidimensionally myself and having interesting things happen, and
Hmm.
which helped me from an experiential point of view, as well as through my work, validating a lot of the information that was coming through hypnosis, and the issue of what is considered reincarnation, past lives, and then information coming through where people would have experiences in other planets
Hmm.
prior to this one. But it was really the catalyst was when I eventually was working privately with this work, and a gentleman came to see me. He's a long-term friend now, bless his heart. And he said to me, Mary, I've heard you're open-minded. For this, there's no support groups. For this, they just think you're a loony.
Hmm.
And he was a middle-aged man, and he explained that he'd been up on spacecraft, he'd woken up with marks on his body, shaved areas, his partner was having experiences, the children were having experiences,
Wow.
relatives had come to the house because they thought it was demons. Could I help? And as life would have it, and synchronicities, I
Hmm.
read 2 books prior to that, only a few weeks prior to that, literally. And one was Dr. John Mack, the Harvard professor of psychiatry,
Of course.
who actually validated this through abduction, human encounters with aliens. and Passport to the Cosmos was his second one, of course, where he
Hmm.
absolutely validated this was a reality. And of course, Whitley Strieber's book, the classic Communion. So I've
Mm.
read those and thinking, here's a Harvard professor of psychiatry
Wow.
saying, I believe this is real. Somebody saying, well, this is my experience, as an experiencer of this contact. And then my lovely friend came along and said, I'm having these experiences. I thought it was very rare,
Mm.
until as soon as I got involved with that, I then discovered a social worker that was having experiences. And we decided to create a support group in Perth. And in the very first one we advertised, 12 people turned up.
Wow.
So, and that's in a town that was then a city that was only over 1 million at the time. So that's
Mm.
12. And you're
Wow.
thinking to yourself, hold on a minute, maybe this isn't as rare. And of course, now I not only find out it's not rare in the slightest, there are millions, very likely billions of people out there having
Mm.
experiences, but interpreting them in different ways depending on their religion, their culture, their scientific beliefs, or their anthropological beliefs. But not all of them will see it as we
Right.
do, as ufologists or those that are working in the field, but believing it's some kind of spiritual experience,
Hmm.
demons, or it's a mix of both, or maybe I'm just crazy and
Right.
what have you. So that's been the issue all along is, can I believe this? And if I do, am I crazy for believing that I'm having these experiences? So that's where my focus has been helping someone work through their experiences and make sense of them however it makes sense to, in whatever way
Right.
works for them.
That's right. And, I think a lot of people are having these experiences and they're kind of, it's just so subconscious that, they can barely remember their dreams. They don't, there's really but I do feel like a lot of people probably have no idea that they're having these experiences and are, out of body. I'm not saying everyone's being
Yeah.
taken up physically, because I think that's definitely the rarity. And I think that's what you've also come to find in the data and people that you've studied, the massive group of people. But yeah, I think that we're being aided in many ways that most people are not quite ready to comprehend, and we just don't have the perception, or really right now, our spiritual evolution is just not at a point where it's something that we could even, most of us would be okay with being conscious of, so to speak.
I think that's what I would say is that, first of all, people need to understand when we did this survey with the Dr. Edgar Free Foundation, 4,200 people, 600 questions. One of the things that was fascinating that came out of that was that 75% of their experiences were out of body. Only
Mm.
25% were actually physical onboard craft. So it makes it even harder to quantify or qualify their experience when it seems like a dream.
Hmm.
And somebody would say, well, I had this dream that I was on a spaceship and I was doing this, this, and this, and this. And I said, well, when did you have the dream? And they said, oh, probably about 10, 15 years ago. And I said, and you still think it's a dream? Because dreams usually disappear within a
That's
few
right.
minutes of waking up. If you still remember details of a dream 15 years ago, it's most likely not
Something
a,
about that dream. Yeah.
you know. So that's one of the things. But there are lots of indicators that people don't realize are part of this, like always feeling like you've never belonged, that this planet really was never home, that you're very different to your siblings, for example, that you see or perceive things other people don't as well, and there's lots of what I call multidimensional experiences where people, maybe feel energy, see energy, or get
Hmm.
information in their head that they have not consciously learned, for example, and they don't put two and two together and think, well, maybe this is my experience or whatever. And so one of my strategies is when someone contacts me and they're saying, I'm not really sure I had this strange missing time when I was a kid, or I saw this strange light when I was 5 years old. I'm not sure if this is relevant to me, but I've always been interested in it and often passionate about seeing craft or having seen craft and what have you. And I send them the questionnaire of the regular patterns of this experience. And the number of times they're coming back and saying, they've ticked so many of the boxes,
Yeah.
have you, and not realized it's all related and all connected. And that's the big revelation. And what I would say is that's happening more and more on the planet or with people now than it's
Yeah.
ever before.
Yes. And I think it's coming at the right time. I think we certainly need it. I see these things as almost completely positive. I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't people who have negative experiences. That's a whole nother podcast and debate. But I do believe that that the vast majority of these things that are happening, really happening, that aren't being, manipulated by certain people and parties that are very much, terrestrial, for nefarious agendas. I believe that this is our celestial family, trying to help us to evolve in time to save this species, or at least this version, this civilization of human, because there seems to have been a few goes at it, and we haven't got it right yet. So I do think that these things, because of just like you said, the changes that people talk about when they integrate these experiences, can be completely multidimensional, absolutely activating. And a lot of them come into abilities which would only fall under the category of ESP, extrasensory perception and all that. So it's like, how can that's an upgrade where I come from. That's not a negative thing for most people, I think. But
I think for me, it was when I wrote the book Awakening, how this contact transforms your life. That was what I was coming across, was time again, a shift in perception and consciousness and philosophy and awareness was complete and very positive, in the sense of once they transcended the fear of it and got to understand it, they were finding they'd got abilities. They changed their, the way they looked at life. They lost materialistic focus and became very much more holistic in the way they looked at things. I remember one gentleman saying to me, I can't even tread on an ant anymore. And when I did the survey, what was fascinating about that survey was that we discovered 85% of those surveyed said they had a psycho-spiritual transformation. That's 85%.
Wow.
So the 15% was still not sure or thought it was bad. But what individuals don't realize, the complexity of how some of those experiences that are negative are not necessarily ET related.
Right.
We have an agenda on this planet, a dark agenda, which is to falsify what this is and to deliberately create fear. And that's a whole other ball game.
Yes,
which
it is.
you know about, which is part of the most traumatized have been those that have been traumatized by our own people.
That's right.
By certain dark groups that want to create the fear around all of this, which is another part of this rather complex agenda.
Absolutely. It's very real. And sadly, those parties have come into immense wealth and resources. And, but I do believe in the human spirit and our ability to transcend and overcome. So, there's a lot of, it's an exciting time to be alive. We'll just say that. But let me ask you, you've documented so many extraordinary cases. Is there any particular one that really completely defied and like changed your entire paradigm about what you thought was even possible?
I'm asked this many, many times, and I can't say there's one specific one. The experiences of so many are absolutely extraordinary. And to give you an example of many years ago, just to explain where this leads you in terms of what is reality, what is this matrix that we're living in, for example. is when I was working with a young graphic designer who found himself in hypnosis as what he called himself was a grey being with 4 digits, and called himself a kind of creator being, which is interesting. And he said, we're moving something big from one dimension to the other, and we've moved it too quickly, and we've got to put it right. And it was a planet. So here is the graphic design describing his future self or his past self, literally moving one object through dimensions. Now, this was many, many years ago, and I remember thinking, well, Mary, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what's possible or impossible. So I would say, I mean, I can talk about a family where every single child is having experiences, as well as the mother and the father, who have links to Egypt and reincarnation with them. And every daughter and child is drawing the beings, and this 17-year-old, well, she's not 17 now, I think she's a couple of years older, has drawn over 250 beings that she interacts with, 250 of them.
Wow.
And it's natural. These are the kinds of cases. I have an 8-year-old that tells me that she's a hybrid. She's part human, part water being, and she comes from a water planet where she says, when I look in the mirror, I see my water being self. And she said, I've come to this planet, she says, and she said, I understand music in a different way to most people. And she was explaining how she feels she connects to the person that's created the music and their feelings and emotions and the story behind it, not just hearing the music. She has a multidimensional ability to pick up and understand the frequencies and the information and codes within that frequencies. 8-year-old, you know. These are the kinds. So what is amazing? I mean, I've written some of them into human. There are so many amazing. Another 7-year-old says that she's part blue avian, part human.
Wow. She said that?
Yeah.
Wow.
She's 7 years old. That her avian family is her family. She goes back there regularly. She explains that she's a healer, and that when she heals somebody, she activates their own healing so they can start healing themselves. And she speaks in a star language, and I've got video of her speaking in a star language to someone else on the phone who's speaking a star language back, and they're actually having a conversation. So when you say extraordinary, it can keep going.
Right.
There is extraordinary and there's extraordinary. There are and the children are in many cases the most extraordinary, simply because they're coming in with no front loading about anything. The parents say, I have not said anything about any of this. This is what my child is telling me, or whatever. Another 10-year-old explaining that he had chosen his mother on this planet. He'd chosen to incarnate to her.
Wow.
He comes from a planet where he's blue, and he's a center seed. He's come to connect with the center of this planet because he's going to help with all the pollution on this planet and what have you.
Wow.
So that's his mandate.
Wow. That's incredible. But it gives you an idea of, I think, the kind of interactions that we are having, you know, like these children who they still have this part of themselves very much intact, and hopefully, you know, many of them retain it, even as they go into adulthood, because I feel like that is also the next phase of our evolution, is to be mature enough to begin to take some of this knowledge and wisdom further into adulthood than maybe previous generations. But it's, you know, like, how do you just write that off? You know what I mean? Like, it's not like, you know, like, what do you say to the parents? Have you been watching Gaia with this kid from the time he was 3? No, you know what I mean? Like, most people are not, you know, they don't hear words like, oh, you know, from a sentient avian species. You know what I mean? Like, that's not something that you would expect an 8-year-old to ever utter, you know, or even understand what, you know, what that means. But it's just so remarkable. You're right. You know, it's like, what's extraordinary? It's all pretty extraordinary. You know, I heard you, and this really caught my interest, but I heard you talking about arcs, you know, and you were discussing them being discovered around the globe. And I was wondering if you could talk a little about that, and because it's such a fascinating subject, and because they're actual places, right? Like and they can be found.
Well, the interesting thing with that is I wasn't even aware of the arcs at all when I was doing a lady in Canada who'd had experiences with some of her friends. And what was fascinating is she remembers going up on a board a craft and going up in a little small craft with a friend of hers who'd had experiences, and she remembers how him saying something like, "Isn't this crazy what we're doing?" Or and being, she remembers the conversation, going up and seeing these beings, seeing some of her close friends on board craft as well. And the next day, her friends, several of her friends rang her up and said, "We had this strange dream last night. We were on a spaceship." And the gentleman who'd had this strange experience where he'd been picked up and ended up in the craft with her had remembered something as well. She said, "I want to find out why they're people that I know and more about the experience." So I did a regression with her, and she discovered that they were the individuals in at the time of Atlantis. And they'd not fulfilled what they'd come here to do, so they've come back to fulfill it this time. So, I mean, there's a lot more to that. But she was also then shown these arcs, and she was shown that there are arcs buried around the planet. And there was one that she particularly identified with. And there's a lot more complexity to that. So I'm going to so this was a week before I came across the information from Dr. Sala and JP, the whistleblower, about arcs. And it was, some of the information was exactly that she'd mentioned to me. And that's what gave it to me tangibility, is like, when you cross-reference and other information comes in. Now, the interesting thing with that is obviously there's been a lot more about the arcs, which are these huge craft that have been, if you like, hidden from humanity, waiting, it seems, for the right time and the right consciousness to actually be activated, because they're activated by consciousness itself.
Right.
That's supposed to be avatars in there, in stasis as well.
Wow.
Now, what had happened many years ago, probably about 5 years ago, I came across the Bosnian, not the Bosnian pyramid, I'm thinking of it's in Europe anyway. There's a pyramid there with the Sphinx found in 2003. And it's written about by Peter Moon in Transvalian Sunrise and many other books, where they found in 2003 through a Sphinx in the landscape that underneath there was a facility that was obviously very, very ancient, where if with the right consciousness you could go in there, and they had all this technology. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that. Peter Moon's written about it. It's quite well known now about it. But what was interesting about that was they were finding artifacts that were activated by consciousness. What was interesting about it was that this lady is part of a remote viewing group. And I said, well, is there anything there as well underneath this particular Sphinx and pyramid? And they remote viewed it, and underneath there was actually another pyramid and a craft.
Wow.
So there's a potential arc. And then, of course, we hear that there's an arc in Mount Fuji. There's one in Australia. There's
Antarctica, right? Yeah.
Whatever. So all this about the arcs is coming up. Now I'm going to go to one side of this and say there's also one in Iraq. And part of the reason it was invaded was not because they had weapons of mass destruction.
Well, never because of that. Yeah.
It was actually, and the reason, this is an interesting one for me, because at the time of that invasion, all about weapons of mass destruction, what they did was they raided the museum in Baghdad, and they'd actually found that Saddam Hussein had, if you like, found archaeological
I remember reading about this. Yes.
He had, in fact, technology that was very, very advanced, and had found this technology very advanced. Now there's information, it could have been the Stargate.
Right. I saw pictures of it. Yeah.
Okay.
And
Now
it looked like a doorway, right? It almost looked like a doorway, right?
that's right.
Right.
Well, that was the reason. Now, the reason I validate that even more is around that time, I was given information by an intuitive in England that said, Mary, you need to know the reason they've invaded Iraq is not what they're saying, that there's some technology, or there's something there that they don't want the rest of the public to know.
Mm.
And the reason that was important was I knew someone in American intelligence at the time, and I just thought, I'll ask if he
Right.
knows anything about it, you see. So I said, this is what I'm getting from an intuitive in England, you know. What do you make of that? He said, Mary, don't write about it, don't email it, don't talk
Wow.
about it, or whatever. In other words, shut up.
Right. Wow.
And I sort of thought, well, there's something to it. And of course, years down the track, I find there's absolutely something to it. And they've tried
Wow.
to make it. So you get this kind of thing going on, you know, all this kind of information. And constantly I'm trying to validate it and get to work out what's really going on. Is it just, I mean, intuitives can be absolutely spot on, but they can also,
Sure.
you know,
They can miss too.
They can miss. But the fact that this intelligence officer said to me, don't ever mention, of course I've mentioned it quite a bit since.
Right. Well, you probably waited long enough for.
I did talk about it for a long time. But
Yeah.
this is my point, that, oh yes, so we have now numbers of people that talk about the arcs. The sense is that they've been activated by consciousness, and that you have to have the right higher consciousness to actually get into the arcs, because this is about the upgrading, I believe, and the activation of humanity. And we had to reach a certain level of awareness. But the way that I got into that was completely not through the research, but through my actual work, where I was actually told about this information. Particularly the what people need to understand is past life, we call it, is actually very relevant to what's actually going on now, whether you call it a past life or the fact that time isn't linear anyway.
Right.
And that we can access time zones and go there with our consciousness at any time anyway. So that sort of messes up the linear timeline anyway, you know. So you've got more expansive in the way that you look at all of this, because many of those that come to me relate to being star seeds, in other words, coming from planets, other realities, other dimensions, other timelines, other frequencies, and the future. A 7-year-old told me he came from the future.
Amazing. You know, I just would be remiss if I didn't mention this. You know, I want to remind everyone, most of my loyal listeners are very well aware of this anyway, but for maybe some of the newcomers, understand that it is the exact same families who have worked overtime to form organizations and keep the truth about these subjects out of the public's sphere and misdirect them at every turn. These are the same families that orchestrate and puppet the politicians and get us into conflicts. So if you think for a moment that they wouldn't orchestrate something like, you know, weapons of mass destruction to go in solely to secure this artifact, then you don't understand who you're dealing with, and you haven't been paying enough attention, because it's absolutely something that they would do without a second thought. I mean, it would be among their checklist of things to get done. When they do these, when they start conflicts of this kind, it's for a multitude of reasons. They have a whole checklist, you know. It's got to further the agenda in a lot of ways, and this would have fit right in with what I understand. So I just wanted to piggyback on what you said, so that people realize that there's absolutely validity and, you know, hundreds of years of to show that these are the same people that have done a bang up job keeping everything out of the public's, well, not everything, but, you know, most of the public and the mainstream, they just write this stuff off, you know, but they don't know better. So,
It's
yeah,
basically realizing everything you've ever been taught is probably a lie.
that's right. And it's a
And just,
hard pill to swallow for a lot of people, but swallow it you must, and a lot of unlearning. And it, I mean, no, that's a whole nother podcast. But you're absolutely right. It's everything, almost essentially everything that we're taught. Is a fabrication of some sort, or really a misdirection from what is reality. I mean, when you think about the fact that we're perceiving almost nothing of reality with our senses, then everything else makes a lot more sense. But, you've spoken about how, we are evolving into something new. And, I think when you're not conscious of something, it's very difficult to experience it, obviously. But I think the more people who realize and who start to get a sense of the fact that in my humble opinion, we are absolutely evolving into something new. Would you say that this is the next phase of human evolution? And is it even entirely human, or is it like, can you say that it's entirely human?
it's a good question, but I have to go back because for me, okay, so what is really going on? What are we? In other words, first of all, were the gods? For example, were they not gods? Actually, they were evolved. Not all evolved ETs, but certainly they were technologically ahead of us.
Right.
Were perceived as gods. I always remember this young Indian gentleman, young adult, saying to me, "Mary, I'm a starseed." He said, "In India, we have about 100 gods." He said, and the trouble is with my countrymen, they think that they're all gods, but I know they're just extraterrestrials, but I can't say anything because my family wouldn't understand. That's just one example. But the way that I look at it from a practical scientific point of view is that we know that our DNA was altered
Yes, we do.
between Cro-Magnon, Neanderthal, and all the other different ones within a missing link. Suddenly we get twice the brain size, 223 extra genes that nobody can explain.
One adjustment, one fusion of a
You know,
chromosome, right? Like nobody wants to try to
yeah,
explain that,
we're told that at least 12 different species were involved in that, but maybe even more than that. But the bottom line is the gods were there monitoring humanity evolving. And we've been evolving from that time and gradually getting, I believe, upgrades to that. We have 95% of our DNA is not coded. They don't understand what it does. Only 5% is understood. 1 gram of DNA, for example, can contain all the information on the internet.
Yep.
Just 1 gram. Okay. What is the 95%? What is held there? And Dr. Francis Crick, co-founder of the DNA Molecules, said that they programmed us at a certain point for us when we were ready to actually awaken to who we are. He absolutely believed that we were intelligently designed. So you've got to go back to that to start with. And then you realize that we have slowly been guided by these intelligences to the point we are now. Why do experiencers have downloads of codes? Language, frequency, for example, symbols. What is that all about? Unless unless it's something that in some way is going to affect us and does affect us. Because you don't, when people say to me, how do you know they're having experiences? Well, does the normal person suddenly find themselves sitting down and writing strange symbols,
Right.
or suddenly doing, an energetic work and suddenly coming out with these strange languages? Does a normal person do that? No, they don't.
No, and the fact that those languages and the character that they're creating resembles very much the same kind of thing that another person on a different side of the world is,
Exactly.
begs a question.
That, so the evidence of this experience is through the changes it makes in some individual, because unless it's a real experience, nobody's going to change. They change because they've had a very real experience, which has changed them forever. And so ultimately, there's your evidence for a start. Now it's in language, in music, it's in codes and all of this. And how does that affect the individual? I'll give you an example of that. I was doing a presentation many, many years ago, and I was showing some of the symbols and some of the scripts and some of the language, and I know it activates people when they see it. And I was showing all of this, and after the presentation, a lady who was a nurse actually came to me. She said, and as soon as you did that, Mary, I started to write all these strange symbols down.
Wow.
I'd seen what I on the screen. It had activated her. Now, that's just one example. I've had other profound responses to some of the information that I've shown. I've almost made a kind of statement. Look, if you don't want your reality changed,
Close your eyes.
either go out the room now, because I'm taking no responsibility for how it might change your reality, because I can't. The whole idea is that, and many of the experiences say they're here to shift the consciousness of the planet. They're here to activate people and what have you. And the healers will talk about it. They're doing the energetic work and people change. They find themselves changing in the way they look at the world, the way they look at reality, ecology, wanting to live a more holistic life, a more simple life, and change their diet. All of this happens because of their experiences. So there's your reality for a start. So what's going on? What I'm seeing is huge changes in those that are coming to me that have had what they believe is some kind of activation. Some were after 2012, believe it or not, and some of the last 2 or 3 years have found themselves suddenly switching and changing after an experience. And the experience may not always be conscious contact. It may be because they've done a shamanic journey, ayahuasca, or had an in-depth experience, or an out-of-body experience, or started a remote viewing course, or a healing course. So all of these are modalities that can trigger and activate more of their awareness, and they start to see beings, angelic beings, or interdimensional beings. A whole range of different intelligences may start to make themselves known to them because they've opened more of their multidimensional awareness up. So it doesn't have to be contact.
No, it doesn't necessarily. And, I think a lot of people kind of open this door sometimes through trauma, through, whether it's an accident, which, a near-death experience is one thing, but even, I often talk about, I don't talk about it too much, but, the first time I went out of body, I was getting a beating from my old man with a belt. And, he caught me, and I was probably, I don't know, 9, 10 years old. And I just remember, I didn't want to feel the pain, and I thought, I don't have to stay here. But I was in such a state of fight or flight, and I just remember all of a sudden I was on the ceiling and I was looking down on my father, with me across his legs and his belt and my bare butt, and thinking, I knew it. I knew I didn't have to stay here for this, which was the first kind of out of body experience I ever had. And I'll never forget it because I thought I was so crafty. Man, I couldn't sit down for like 3-4 days, but I feel like a lot of people experience trauma, and that can also be a doorway. But again, it's like, then they tend to think like they're perceiving things and they think something's wrong with them. And it's just, there's so much complexity to it. But it certainly doesn't necessarily have to be, I think, this experience, of abduction or even NDE. But so I love speaking to clairvoyants. I've had many experiences myself with psychics and psychic experiences. And I had Inge Bardor. I don't know if you ever heard of her. She's known as like a super psychic. She's one of the, these days it's becoming more and more common, but she could read through her feet. She could read through her armpit. She was friends with Drunvalo Melchizedek. Well, is friends with him. And you've worked with thousands of people who have these kind of experiences and abilities, and do you consider them, are they star children? Are we all star children?
Well, you've said it yourself.
Yeah.
I believe that the planet's been inundated with, because they say, well, when are they going to come and help us? Well, they are actually. You know, there are many that have incarnated from other places, from other star systems, other galaxies, interdimensionally and probably extra-dimensionally as well, that have come in with certain abilities to help shift this planet, and some to anchor the energies, some to come as healers, some of them to come to help with the ecology of the planet, some to come with helping with looking after the star. They'll know their mandate. They'll say, this is my job. This is why I've come to the planet or whatever. So we are getting help, but you're getting help in a way where the souls are incarnating here to actually help this with the evolution of the planet itself. And that's what is quite fascinating, because I'll often get an individual come to me and say, I know I've got something to do, but I don't know what it is yet. And my favorite response to that is, well, your soul isn't going to let you miss the bus. So
Right.
just hang in there, because one way or another, you'll know when the time is, because otherwise it would be a bit of a waste of time, wouldn't it?
Right.
You know, and that's what I'm getting time and time again, this sort of holding phase, waiting for this next
Right. I tell
catalyst.
people, I say, you want to find out? First become the healthiest, happiest version of yourself, and then that path will open to you like the sun coming up after a long night. I said, there's no doubt in my mind, that's what I tell people, because a lot of people, I think, are unsure, because it's like, you have to move out of survival mode and making sure, you're going to be able to, pay your rent and have the next meal on the table for the kids. And then you can start to see more, because stress is very tunnel vision. Yeah. But, so we talked a little bit about this, and I want to revisit it, because, there's a lot of fear mongering put out by a lot of parties for a lot of reasons. None of them for the evolution of humanity. And I think none of it is in any way anything to be actually afraid of. Those of us in this community, we know that there has been black ops programs of every sort. Most people would never believe it, even if they learned about it, but they've been very busy, and so some of the more terrifying encounters that we hear, when they make movies about, about paralysis and certain probing and medical, like, I think many of them, if not most of those experiences, are probably man-made. It's like psych ops, staged. But I mean, where do you stand on that?
Well, there's two things that come up. First of all, certainly, we're talking on one program, which is My Lab, for example, the military
MyLab, right?
The My Lab. That is absolutely real. And I have met many, many hundreds of people that have had My Lab experiences. What they're seeing when they think are ETs are often programmed life forms. And that means that the genetic material taken from ETs and creating, if you like, beings that are under the control of the military or whatever, that are not real ETs for a start. And they're programmed life forms.
Right.
Okay. So they may be part of an orchestrated fear-based experience for the individual who is interrogated or drugged or whatever. I remember one account where I was doing in hypnosis, the lady was on the table and she was being shown a huge picture of above her of a mantis, saying, these are evil, these are bad, these are evil, these are bad, basically programming her to be terrified of mantis beings or whatever. I could go on about that. So that is being deliberately done over many, many years, so that people that have these experiences believe it's ET, when in fact it's not. It's actually My Lab. So there's one thing. The other thing is, in some of the experiences that people have where they're scared and don't always know why, one of the useful things that has come out of that, I'll give you one example of a gentleman who was very comfortable about being on the craft, very comfortable with the beings. He said, but the one thing that always terrified him is when that big eye started coming towards him. And I said, why does that scare you? And he said, because I think they're taking me over. And I said, well, do you want to find out what happened? Let's find out what really happened, because often what we believe happened and what really happened are often two different things.
Right.
I'm just giving you one example here of because I will say, we'll go to the origin of your fear. And this gentleman sat there, and he's very brave and courageous, and he's describing, as his body's getting more and more tense, this eye coming towards him very, very gradually. And I'm saying, okay, so take it one step further. Is it coming close? Yes, he says it's coming closer. It's coming. His voice is getting higher and getting higher. And then all of a sudden, he just relaxes. And I said, so what happened? And he said, they're just giving me information.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So everything he'd feared was not true. He just hadn't realized what actually that next step was.
Right.
I'll give you countless examples of that. So when somebody says, I'm terrified of something that's happened, in hypnosis, I can say, well, we'll go to the origin of that and we'll find out what happened. Another one very briefly was a lady in England in her 60s that had been terrified all her life. Her whole family had gone up on craft. There's a history of the experiences over a lifetime. And she was another one that was absolutely terrified when you mentioned any of this. And I said, so let's go to the origin of your fear. Briefly, she went back to when she was 2 years old in the cot, and two beings were looking down at her. I can't remember whether they were mantis beings. They might have been. And so I said, so, okay, so what happened? She said, I'm looking at them and they scared me. I said, but did they do anything to hurt you? She said, no, they did nothing at all. She said, they were just observing me. And she went into, oh my God, they've been helping me all my life.
Oh my God.
Done. And she came out of it and she was dancing around the room. She couldn't believe that she'd lost fear after 60 odd years because she hadn't understood. And it was just primarily the little child being scared of two unusual looking, strange beings looking down at her. Hadn't touched her, hadn't heard her. They were just observing her. So that's my point. We often imagine the worst when in fact, if we go into it, we may find it's not what we actually believed it to be.
Almost all the time, I feel like that is the case, and you can extrapolate that right across the board, I think, because right on the other side of that thing that we fear or that we imagine is the scariest thing is usually like, you know, the dissolution of that horror that we've held for so long. And you know, who said there's nothing to fear but fear itself? Was that Kennedy?
Yes, I can't remember, but I'll tell you one other part of that. When I work with someone and they want to know what happened in an experience, for example, why the beings have picked them up, why they're important, why, you know, all those kind of reasons, when you take them into hypnosis and they take them into where they see themselves on the craft and they're seeing the beings around them, you can ask the question, which one's familiar to you? And there's always one that's familiar because it's more than you've been picked up generally. And that being can respond and say, oh, when you were 2, 5, 7, or whatever it is. And then you can say, why me? Why have you picked me up this time? And that there's a response, well, we're doing a medical procedure. So you can then get them to ask their questions in trance of that being and get the answers that they've been probably wondering about all their lives. And that can all happen in that hypnotic state. You can have that conversation. So again, they can get their answers. Why me? What is it that is important? And they can have all the questions answered in that space, having that dialogue, because there is no such thing as time. You can actually, so that's another way that you can help them understand their own journey.
It's funny, you know, I've always been a little scared of insects, but I've never been afraid of the praying mantis. And I had a incredible ayahuasca. The first time I had an ayahuasca journey, I had this experience, and I remember. I'm pretty sure I arranged it, but I remember when they showed up, these two mantis beings showed up, and I was communicating with them, and I forgot I told them, you know, if you guys, you know, in my meditation, and like if you guys are available, I know that I'm going to be in a certain state on this night, you know, because that was so many months before, but then. When I looked up and saw them, of course, they're unmistakable with their silhouette and their color. And it's just like, it tells you a lot about these programs, that they're programming you to be afraid of, you know, what I understand to be one of the most spiritual and healing of races, the mantis beings, you know, when it comes to humanity and most of their interaction with us, you know, they're telling you to be afraid. Meanwhile, every experience I've had and read about has been one of, you know, healing and communion. So it's just, it's wild. But you know, have you ever heard? I've talked to Dean Radin.
Oh,
I'm sure.
have you?
Yes.
Oh,
He's, and you know, obviously he's this is this is my kind of scientist, but he's
yes.
measured psi phenomena. And I've also spoken to Adam Curry, who's a friend of mine, and you know, and he of course says consciousness is a tunable field. But you know, if that's true, in your opinion and in your experience, how easy is it to interfere with our signal? And you know, our, because our bodies are, you know, we're exposed to a lot more signals than ever before on this planet with all the technology, and we're also transmitters and receivers. We know that now. That's a biological innate capacity. We have a north and south pole, and you know, with like like what do they call them, WBANs and Li-Fi and you know blue light. We have all this brain altering technology that is kind of messing with our biochemistry. So how do we tell real psychic download or phenomenon from these synthetic manipulation or digital signals that we're being bombarded with?
Well, the primary thing is intent. That these lower frequencies, whether or not they're interdimensionals or they're other entities that are trying to connect to us, almost like, you know, plugging in your electricity.
Right.
If you're in fear, then you're going to draw that to you. So fear-based frequencies, all those lower entities, all that dark stuff will literally be able to plug into you. If you're in ego, it's the same thing. You're going to get the same kind of frequencies that are going to work with ego or whatever. The only way that you can be sure of connecting to the higher realms of the highest frequencies is to come from that love and compassion and
Right.
heart and whatever. And your intent is that.
That's right.
Because
The
when
ultimate protection.
it's the ultimate protection.
That's right.
And, you know, people that are having experiences and are tapping into their source, to their higher self over soul or whatever, or to what they call their guides or their gatekeeper or whatever, it's very distinct to actually be able to know who that is ultimately. There are ways that you can actually ascertain who you're actually dealing with and whatever. And I help people work with that and understand how that works. And the other thing to say to people, and I'm going to keep this very black and white for those that are opening up multidimensionally, is how do you know the difference between your imagination and multidimensional information? And first of all, with left brain, you think before you speak. With multidimensional information, you speak before you think. It's the complete reverse of that. The second thing is, how do you know it's not your imagination? Well, it's actually quite easy, because if something's a reality, for example, like your bedroom, you know where the bed is, you know where the window is, you know where the door, because it's real, it's your bedroom. If I said to you, imagine or create a bedroom, you'd need to think to create it. You'd need to think,
Right.
oh, where would I put the bed? Where would I put the window? Where would I put the door? When you get multidimensional information, it's instant. It's there before you even realize that it's there. And it usually surprises you, because you think,
Yep.
I didn't realize I was as wise as that. Or where did that come from? That's multidimensional information. It's coming through a sensing, feeling, knowing, visual, auditory, or a whole range of other multidimensional experiences. But it will be instant. The only problem is that people, because it's so strange or different and they don't expect it, will bring in left brain to try and edit it.
Mm-hmm.
When you do that, you're actually coloring the integrity of the information.
Right.
Because
Right.
to actually be a clear channel, you have to allow the package
That's right.
as is, without interference. And that's the hardest thing to do, because if it's really weird and strange,
Right.
part of you wants to analyze it and use logic to, but that's not when it's coming in from that source. And the next thing is, where is that source? Where, who is your source?
Mm.
Is it your higher self, or is it a guide, or your life guide, or is it other spiritual guides, or is it a being or whatever? You need to then work out who you're interacting with, because then you can start having conversation.
Right.
You can actually say then, okay, so this is so and so, explain this to me.
Mm-hmm.
That's the next level. It's not just about downloads, then you want to understand what the downloads are about, and so
Absolutely.
actually be fully, what I call fully functional in a telepathic way.
Absolutely. And what's incredible is the information comes, and I mean, I guess it's holographic in nature, because you do have all of it.
Yes. Yeah.
It's just there, and you don't know exactly how it got there, but you can certainly explain it all. Especially when you're not trying to, when you don't let that the part of your brain come in and try to micromanage and muddy the waters on you. But it's incredible for anybody who's had that experience, myself included. It's just, how do you know? Like, I just woke up and knew. I don't know how I know, but I can
Yeah.
tell you all about it. It's remarkable, and it really showcases the fact that we are always sending and receiving. And I tell people all the time who have experiences, that they're supernatural, and there are little things that happen, and they get freaked out and they get scared, and then the religious indoctrination comes in, and they think, that this is, quote, demonic, or that somebody is using voodoo. And I'm just like, if you take a step back and think about what has actually happened, was it in any way threatening or scary, or
Yeah.
what? No, it was just like, all of a sudden I had, my perception. Okay, like, so if you're observing what happened, and you take away the scary music, so to speak,
Yeah.
just like if you go to see a horror movie and you block your ears, it's not really scary anymore. They're using that sound to build, and then they, but it's like, if you take away that part of the sensory, or the bias of the information, then all of a sudden it's like, well, there was nothing to be scared of. It's just something that I perceived, right? But again, I tell people, this is your Superman, right here. This makes you virtually invulnerable. If you can open this heart, there is nothing that's going to want to hang out in that vibration with you if you are pouring out love. Everything that is not of that kind of high frequency is going to run away from you. Obviously not literally, but it cannot be in that, because then it risks its own negative integrity, right? If it stays too much, like a tuning fork, And
Yeah.
I tell people, this is what I do, and I've learned to do it because it's so incredibly effective in any situation you come up where fear tries to take over. If you can open your heart, that feeling, whether it be external or internal, it cannot remain, right? So I just love what you said. I wanted to piggyback a little bit on it.
I think we're here to learn about love and what's not love. And, and we've got to have that contrast so that we can actually start to work out, well, where do I want to be in those frequencies? Where is it that I'm drawn to the most? And it's the challenge, isn't it? And when
Yeah.
somebody's opening up multidimensionally and they're wanting to connect to that source and whatever, and they say, well, what if someone tries to influence me and is negative and what have you? I said, as long as you're in that high frequency with your intent, they can't plug in.
Right.
They literally
Exactly.
can't plug in. There's no way they can plug
Wrong
in.
outlet, and that would never work.
That's right.
So true. And it's really is. People don't realize that all the protection they need is right here in the human heart. It's right here, always accessible. People wear charms and they do rituals, and I'm like, you don't understand the power of this right here. This energy center, this part of your body that's God. That's the universe right there with you all the time. All you got to do is become aware of it and let it out, and then you got nothing to be afraid of. I don't care what it is. But speaking of spiritual evolution and upgrading biology, so this sounds a lot like and I hesitate to say this, but we have this transhumanist agenda that is being pushed, right?
Yeah.
And I do think that they're going to use some of the themes that we're talking about to try to get people to sell themselves to this, and so I'm wondering, what's the difference, and how can people navigate these coming years where it's going to be a lot of different sales pitches about upgrading, your DNA and your human experience?
Well, that's a good question. And I think that's going to be definitely the dilemma, isn't it, of those that want a quick fix. It's
Mm,
like, when you're sick, rather than find out why you're sick, you take the nearest tablet that's available
right.
to you. We have and are super beings in
Yeah,
potential. Absolutely. But we have to work at that. It's
that's
not
right.
going to suddenly just manifest. Whereas what they're offering is the instant fix. Have this implant, have that implant, and you can see beyond this and you can do all of this. We now have and have seen that autistic children are telepathic through the
That's
telephony,
right.
for example. I have met many children that see beyond physical sight because they've been taught how to do it. So can we do that? We don't need our physical eyes. We can see with our consciousness. That's already being shown. How, remote viewing, you can send your consciousness into the past and the future and whatever. All of these are our abilities innate in us,
Hmm.
innate, but we have to work at that. Whereas there are always going to be those that say, I want the instant fix. And that's
Hmm.
going to be their soul's choice. If that's the way that they want to experience their human life, well, that will be their choice. And
Yeah,
there'll be others that say, no, I want to work at this and do it through consciousness or whatever. And I think the soul is going to make those choices depending on what their agenda is in this lifetime. I think the one thing that's been very interesting and helpful to me was when I work with people in past lives and you take them to a previous life. And I'm saying that because it's all actually in the same frequency,
hmm,
actually. Anyway, we call it a past life. And they maybe starve to death or whatever. And when they've gone past the death sequence and they're seeing themselves just as spirit, and I'll say, so what did you learn in that life? And they'll say, well, I learned about limits, or I learned about compassion, or I learned
hmm.
about, so I didn't do so well in this, this, and this. And I'll probably have to look at that in my next incarnation where they'll choose their own parents again and siblings from their soul group or whatever. But what I'm seeing is the soul is always wanting to experience and expand and upgrade. And some human adventures are more challenging than others, depending
Hmm.
they want to get to somewhere. That makes a lot of sense to me. And that's where I sort of look at it is everyone's going to make choices depending on what it is they most wish to explore. And there's no judgment in that. This is the way they want to go this time. Right. Well, that's their choice to do so, just as my choice is to go this way. So in terms of getting back to that, some are going to go the transhumanist route because for whatever reason their soul wishes to experience that. No
Yes,
right or wrong about it, just what their soul wishes to do for experience, because I think that's what it's all about.
I agree.
Learning. That's how
I
I understand it.
I have a similar understanding, and I think that 100 years from now, 200 years from now, there will be people who are quasi cybernetic, just like we see in the sci-fi movies. But you know what? Like, that may be what they've come to experience, and I'm sure that if in their next incarnation, Earth doesn't have all the amenities that they're looking for, there's a planet that does that. I do feel that you know this infinite creation that we are living in, that there is something for everyone. And if you can get past the duality and the
Yeah,
the lack of nuance that the humanity tends to bring into these thoughts, then you realize that, yeah, there's in all likelihood, in all probability, a planet for every type of person and their orientation, right? Like, there just has to be, because there's an infinite amount of them, right? Uh, um, I I talk a lot about how this planet is shifting, and how thankfully, it's bringing its children with it, because we need to expand our consciousness. We need to up, our understanding and our frequency, and all those terms that we love to use. Do you think that that's part of it? Like, do you see the earth as, because I feel like the earth is demanding that we evolve with it, that we upgrade with it. And I think it's doing that in part for its own health and well-being, but also for the survival of ours. What is your take on that?
Well, to the thing that makes the most sense to me is that it's a unified field of consciousness, and everything is part of that. We are part of everything. So whatever's happening in the human species is, I believe, happening across the board to everything that is conscious. And I believe the planets are conscious. I believe the animals, obviously, and there are those already, children and adults, that communicate with animals, communicate with plants, communicate with crystals. I always remember this 6-year-old explaining to his mum as he's holding a meteorite, and he's explaining what the meteorite is saying to him, like, where it came from, how it approaches, where it landed, and what have you. And she said, "How do you know what it's saying?" He said, "Well, it's all in my mind. It's talking to me in my mind," or whatever. I believe everything is consciousness itself. So whatever's happening to us, I believe is happening across the board. And they're saying that they're already realizing that, dogs and cats are becoming a lot more intelligent and aware and what have you. And I believe that's with everything that's actually going on. Yes, do I believe that we're moving to a different dimensional, or a dimensional shift of some kind? Yes, I think that's exactly what's going on. We've reached the limits of 3D and whatever, into the fourth to the fifth. And I think that's how things evolve.
Yes.
Go from a dense, and getting the understanding of that. And once you've got the understanding of that, you move to a more expanded reality. And I believe that a lot of the codes that are coming in to a lot of the star seeds and what have you are the new protocols, the new software for the upgraded human, because we're going to need new software to interpret our greater reality. Otherwise, we're going to go, a bit crazy.
Right.
How do I manage this when...
And people are going a bit crazy.
And they are, because what I think is the downloads are, some of it is the software for the new upgraded human. Because to give you an example, I remember one experiencer saying to me that just one symbol multidimensionally can contain enough information to fill a room of encyclopedias. Well, if that's the case, and we're getting all these symbols and all these packages of information, what is it for? Unless it's for us to manage our new expanded reality. Because when that happens, it's going to be mind-blowing for the 3D brain. We're going to need a new format, new software.
That's right.
The upgrade. So that's my sense. I mean, I've no idea if I'm right, but that's my sense.
I have a similar sense. I feel like, a lot of the, I don't want to say malfunctioning, that's a terrible word to use, but a lot of people you see, some of them have come into celebrity status, and all of a sudden, they're talking about all these different things, and a lot of them are true. And it's like, they've come into so much more awareness, but they don't have I don't know what else to call it, the spiritual fortitude to be able to filter out, the information, and also sit with it, instead of just, and they have a microphone. People like Kanye, who they seem like they've lost it. And, I'm like, if somebody taught Kanye to meditate, he might be able to bring some coherence into all these things that he's saying and perceiving. But you see that, and I think a lot of people, and we have all these diagnoses and pharmaceuticals for people who take information in and express it differently, or feel differently than what we understand as normal. And I do think this is all, symptomatic of an evolving planet with a massive influx of energy. And that the more we understand about that, the less we're going to need labels and prescription pills to help people, they're going to be able to integrate much more, with the way they function and their bodies. That's my sense about it. No.
I agree with you. The fact is the labels, and that's what I wrote about in The New Human, of course, is the fact that these labels, ADHD, Asperger's, dyslexia, autism, and even bipolar, actually has come up recently as well, is they're labels that don't actually indicate what's really going on. And I believe I always, I write about a wonderful gentleman that gave me an inkling into that was Ian Gold, an experiencer in his 50s, and said he would be labeled as ADHD if he was a child now. And he said, I always saw a greater reality than most people. And he wrote about his book, Close Encounters of the ADHD Kind. And he translated it as always dialed into higher dimensions.
That's right.
The ADHD is operating in a higher frequency, but because it's misunderstood and labeled as a dysfunction, they medicate to lower the frequency so they can be programmed.
Right. Keep everything in that side of the brain.
And the same, with the autistic, with the dyslexic, they're coming in with new brain wiring, I believe, deliberately to stop them being reprogrammed into the old matrix that is dysfunctional and limited and limiting, because they are already tapped into the more multidimensional side of their awareness. Once we understand that, and that was why it was so important to write about that, because nearly every child that I talk to with their parents are given labels. It'll be ADHD or neurodivergent or autistic or dyslexic or whatever. And I'm thinking, why is that? And I noticed because it's all coming through it comes through the intergenerational link of parents, grandparents, etc. You can see the link to the upgrades and what have you that are going on. And basically, they're the upgrades. And all we need to know is understand how to manage that. And that's why I looked at preventative measures of, instead of medicating someone, the ADHD needs more choline, for example, and different kinds of minerals to keep them stable. And then you don't need to medicate them. And all of that I deliberately wrote about, because you've got to have a solution. What's the solution? Well, the solution is, how can you manage this? And gradually, what was heartening for me more than anything was getting clinical psychologists contact me, educators and parents thinking, because I wrote that book thinking only the weird and wonderful are going to read this one. Right. Because Mary's really out there anyway, and she doesn't, I didn't edit anything deliberately. I'm thinking, no, that's truth. Whether you like it or not, you're going to read it and you can decide it's crazy or not, up to you, because it was important not to edit. And yet I'm getting all these very professional, credible people saying, I'm seeing these kids all the time. How can I best help them? Have you? And I'm being blown away by the acceptance of that. That's what shows me we are shifting, because 20 years ago, some of the things I talked about 30 years now are accepted.
Right.
And it's like, well, 30 years ago, Mary was round the bend, Mary was...
A lot of validation has come.
Or something, whatever. But I didn't care, because I knew the people that needed to read that or see that were the ones I was trying to reach, not the ones that didn't understand or didn't know. That's not who I was trying to reach at all, so that they didn't feel isolated and alone. And with all those questions that I, put into a questionnaire, to give you an example of how powerful that can be, I had a 60-year-old, very down-to-earth Aussie bloke contact me saying, I've had weird things happen all my life. He said, you're never going to understand. I don't know what to do with it, but it's happening all my life. And I said, well, look, I'll send you the questionnaire and see what you think of that. Within 24 hours, this gentleman was sobbing on the phone saying, wow, how do you know about my life? Not realizing that this is all the patterns that are right across the board for so many people. And they always think it's just them because they can't talk about it, because nobody wants to hear them, or the other person thinks they're weird, or the other person thinks they're scared of it, or just thinks they're crazy.
Right.
So it's one of the most isolating things in the world because it's not acceptable to see or experience or hear things. And the medical profession is the first on board with that.
That's right.
Are you hearing voices? It's his favorite, isn't it?
It's unbelievable. And, you know, it's a systemic problem because, of course, then there's the massive profits that come across the board with every kind of diagnosis and prescription. And meanwhile, here we are. And this is, you know, just part of our experience. It's part of our innate nature. And, you know, just like any kind of bell curve, you have people who are going to be on the outliers, you know, people who are kind of average, and then people who can perceive more or maybe even less, you know. But it's like, it's just unbelievable how these monopolies have suppressed and crushed, you know, the human experience in a way that has caused so much suffering. And I talk about that a lot, which, you know, we're not going to get it too much into. I want to finish on a positive note, because this conversation is just very exciting for me. And, you know, this is absolutely, in my opinion, an evolutionary moment in human history, a big one. And I think it's transitional. Everyone's like, well, it's got to get a lot worse before it gets better. I'm like, well, maybe, but I wouldn't say it has to. You know, we are making this all up. Couldn't we all just collectively wake up and decide to make it better instead of going through like another dark night of the soul? I mean, we have that creative collective capacity, do we not? But, you know, what gives you hope, Mary? What tells you that we may just get it right this time?
Two things, and I've said this many, many times, is the fact that so many beautiful souls have incarnated from all over the galaxies and dimensions and planets to incarnate as humans, to bring in their awareness, their understanding, their healing, their energies. The fact that they've done that, I don't believe they would incarnate for a waste of time. That's the first thing, because, you know, they're aware enough to know whether it's going to work or not. So if it's not going to work, I can't see them volunteering. Secondly, as a personal note, and I'm going to make you chuckle probably about that one. If they said to me before I came here, Mary, you're going to work your butt off, girl, down on that planet, you know, and you're going to really give your life to it and all the rest of it, which I have done. But sorry, at the end of it, it's not going to work out. I'm going to be saying to them, do you know what? You can find somebody else.
Right.
I'm volunteering. I'm not, no way. No, thanks very much. I'll leave that one.
Take my name off that list. Yeah.
So they're my two. They might seem a bit insubstantial to some people, but that's the reason why I have great hope that we're going to make it, and we will make it. And there's too many beautiful souls that have come here to actually bring that energy to make this happen. And yeah, I'm an optimist at heart. And as I say, I wouldn't have bothered to incarnate otherwise. I'd have told them to find somebody else to come and do it.
I love that. And thank God you did, because your work gives me great hope. And it's, I mean, I've been a fan for so long, and this has been just a little dream come true for me. I try to be in the habit of making my dreams come true, and interviews like this remind me I'm perfectly capable of it. So I am so grateful for your time. And this was a totally far out conversation. So perfect. I enjoyed it immensely. And, you know, your work is, I mean, for everyone listening, you know, if you know the community, then, you know, Mary's work is legend. You know, she's an amazing, a pioneer, and she's been in this field for as long as anyone. And her work has changed our understanding of these abductions and the experience and the things that happen afterwards. So, Mary, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Tell everyone where they can follow you, find you. Maybe you're probably going to maybe get a few calls about appointments after. I'm sure you get them anyway, but I don't know how. Are you booked months in advance?
I am.
I figured.
I try and get people in as soon as possible. But look, I'm on Facebook, Telegram, Messenger. You know, just Google me. I've got my website, you know, cern.com.au or Mary Rodwell or whatever. One way or another, you can reach me from all these different ways. And what I would like to say before we close.
Absolutely.
Thank you to you for all that you're doing, because without you and beautiful souls like you that put their time and energy and love into allowing this information and facilitating this information to be available to people, we would be lost without you, because it's not something I can do. So this is, this is a big thank you to you as well.
Thank you so much, Mary. That means a lot to me. I appreciate your kind words more than I can express. So for everyone listening on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe. We know a lot of people listening are not actually subscribed. We're trying to grow our channels. If you're listening on Spotify or iTunes, if you enjoyed this incredible podcast, please drop us a comment or a five stars, whatever you're capable of. We appreciate it very much. We talk about a lot of subjects on my channel that are not exactly algorithmically friendly, but we're growing. And Mary, thank you so much. I will be in touch with you when this is going to come out. But I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Take care.
You
Much
too. Have
love.
a great day. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.